Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session of your DEP program, this time about the macro development for beginners. So I will introduce you to the macros and how you can make use of an Alteryx. It's a bit of an advanced concept, but I'm sure this can help you a lot in the end to actually automate your process. So before I jump in further, let's introduce myself. I'm Kilian. I'm working for not that long yet, so I'm Alteryx user since 2020, you can see there. And on the slides, you can see actually my two beautiful docs, and they're here to show you. So the first thing is you can ask yourself, manual work with data? I don't want to do it. That's not nice. So what do? Of course, you use Alteryx for it, because with Alteryx, you can actually automate everything you want and make your life easier. So how you can do is, one big thing to use is to build a macro. There's a third point you see here, and it's exactly the one we will build today. I will show you how that works. And then once you automate your process, you can actually enjoy analyzing your data instead of just wrangling with it in data prep and blend. So with Alteryx, I can actually automate my work. And when I use Alteryx, I can focus on analysis rather than manual data wrangling. You probably learned that in the last weeks already if you attended the other sessions. How strong Alteryx can be and how fast it can be to actually go to the analysis part. So let's jump directly into the agenda for today. First, I will introduce you to Alteryx macros, what they're about, why to. The next block will be how to build a macro. So we jump into the designer training. So you should be able to see one of the files. I shared a workflow with you. You can use as a starting point, and from there on, you can build while I show you how to build along and try it yourself directly. And in the end, I will finish it up with support and resources. So for example, what you can use to actually practice this a bit more, how to use macros. And as you probably saw before in the sessions, we have a really great community here at Alteryx. It's a forum. You can find answers very quickly. You can share your knowledge and everything you want. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I really tell you, take a look there. If you have any questions, you can ask questions in the forums. You get an answer normally within 30 minutes. So it's pretty quick. And then next would be your knowledge is power. That's why you're here. That's why in these sessions. So what we offer in the Alteryx Academy is interactive lessons, live trainings, weekly challenges, and also in the end, product certifications, which are for free. So you can try to get your core in the next couple of weeks or months to actually show that you have the ability to use Alteryx. And I suggest to you to use the weekly challenge to actually practice how to use it. And there you can also practice for macros, for example. We have challenges for nearly everything to use in Alteryx. So let's jump into the background for today's training. So imagine you have a use case and you're tired of doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. For example, in a workflow, using the same set of tools, you just copy paste into a new workflow. You need to change some values in it. It's really manual, or you need to loop tools after each other to finish something. And for this, Alteryx has macros. They basically simplify your life and others en route. So you can just package this process you use all the time over and over again and use it as a single tool. So I will show you now how this can look like. So things we will cover in these sessions are basically what you can see on the right side of the slide is the workflow we will build. That's a macro. So you will learn the tools to use for it, and the rest you probably are a bit familiar with it already. So how to save a macro, build a sample macro, and share it with others. So now you already saw why to use a macro, just to make a process you use over and over again much simpler. So what you can see here on the right-hand side is the count records tool in the middle, the orange one, to count something. And what this actually is not something our engineers programmed or wrote code for, but it's just simply Alteryx tools packaged into this count records tool. So what you can see on the bottom is the count records tool. So the count records tool is taking an input from left-hand side, and then with the sum tool, with the summarize tool, you count the records, and then you basically union it with another input, because the summarize tool, the count has the disadvantage that if there's no records in there, it will output a null value. But you might need to want a 0. So this macro is quite simple, just add a 0 to it. So if it's 0, output 0, and otherwise you get the summarize count. So this is like the simplest example of a macro you may be already using in Alteryx. So we have a couple of tools which are actually just packaged, a package of other Alteryx tools in one, and we will build one of them. So next question is, why do I need it? Of course, to automate a repetitive process, right? So you can solve even faster later. You can, for example, in this case here, instead of building this workflow you see on the bottom over and over again, you can simply just take this tool, the count records tool, and it helps you solve things even faster. And it also simplifies your workflow because you don't see this messy part on the bottom. It's just a simple tool and you know what it's doing. And here it's really important. If you are able to use Alteryx in your workplace later on, and you normally need to share some of this process and you collaborate with your colleagues. So this is really simple to share this workflow then. Just package it in a macro and give it to your colleagues, especially when they're less experienced ones. And we can see later why this is really powerful. So next would be in the macro, what you can see here before, when I go back, you can see the macro at the bottom. That's a whole macro already. You have the input tool, the input on the left-hand side, and the output on the right-hand side, which is macro input and macro output. It's simply where the data goes in, where the data goes out. You will see later in the practice how it looks like concretely. So next question would be, how can I use a macro? What part of a workflow can become a macro? And the answer is pretty much anything you want. So you can have it at the beginning, for example, to reading in data, and you want to process the data already a bit. So in there would be an input data tool and some data prep tools, for example. It can also be just in the middle, like the count records tool you saw before. Just a simple workflow just packaged into this macro. It can also be the end. This would be an example like you want to output some data, simplest way. So if an output data tool and before you have some data blending, for example, or similar. You can even write something in your own database like this. That's how I used the macro before. Or you have the whole thing in there. So you can run the whole workflow. Maybe you grab data online directly and save it in a database. So you can run it as one single tool. Next up, how can I configure it? In the interface designer, you have configurations. You have the standard icon you can see here. You can choose some pre-built ones, but as you can see on the right-hand side here, I will show you later also, you can select any icon you want for it, and I will show you shortly. So this is the basis of a macro. So it's simply multiple tools packaged into one tool. And the powerful part is that we'll come to it later, but let's jump into the Alteryx designer training. So next to the Alteryx designer training, I will share my designer with you, and you can try to work alongside. You can try to open the file I shared with you. And let me show you my screen so you can see what I mean. Okay, so I hope you all can see my Alteryx designer. Let me quickly grab this one down. So here you can see my Alteryx designer, and you can see the currency formatting workflow I shared with you beforehand. And here I have one manual task to do. When I look at this file here, I can see down here, I have payment informations of some employees. So in here, you can see I can barely read them. Like, what is this number even about? Like 212,000 and then some decimal places. So it's really hard to read. I don't even know the currency of it. So my job is to make it readable. So at 1,000 separator, just use 2 decimal places and then add the currency symbol in front of it. So how you can do this, maybe your first thought, think about which tool you want to use. And the first tool probably coming to mind is the tool. And this is what has been done here. It's a good solution. You do this for all the columns you want to change it. So you can simply use the dollar currency symbol and then just add the toString function on the base pay, which actually doing exactly what I said before. It can add the 1,000 separator, which is the last value in here. If it's 1, you add it. If it's 0, there's no 1,000 separator. And the other values in here, you can see the 2 here defines how many decimal places there should be. So, and then you can do it for all your columns you want it on. So, and the result, if I look at it, let's take a look here. Then you have it nicely formatted and readable. But this process is quite manual. You need to do it like for each column and edit it again. It's not really dynamic at all. So the next thing is we have an even better formula tool, which is the multi-field formula tool. I'm not sure if you used it before, but this one can edit multiple fields at the same time. So in this case, on the left-hand side in the configuration window, you see you can choose which columns you want to change. So the formula tool can do this one, but the multi-field formula tool can do it with multiple columns you select in here. And then down here, you have the expression, which is the same as in the formula tool. And the result is that is directly being done on all the columns you selected before, as you can see here down here in the results window. So that's perfect. We're already this far. But the next thing is you might want to simplify it further. You want to change the currency symbol. You want to change maybe the decimal places of it. And maybe also which fields you want to change. And there's an easier way to do this, especially you want to share it with some colleagues who are less experienced. They maybe don't know how these functions are working and feel like a bit intimidated by it. So you can make it easy for them or for yourself also in creating something you can see down here, which automates everything. This is the macro we're going to build today. If you click on it, you can see on the left-hand side in the configuration window that you can choose fields of format. So in this case, I just want 2 of them. And then down here, you can choose currency type. So you have a drop down where you can select the dollar, the euro, the pound, and so on. So if I just select the pound, because I'm based in London at the moment, and here, choose decimal places. I split 3 just for the fun of it. And if I run this, it takes the data, does exactly what I want. And you can see in the output anchor on the right-hand side, 2 columns were added with the formatted base pane over template, exactly how I wanted, with pounds in there, 3 decimal places. So like this is fairly easy configurable. You don't need to dive in any formulas. And you have an easy macro. So now we jump into how to actually build this macro. And if you want to take a look at the macro, the easiest way is you right-click on the tool you have, and then down here you can see Open Macro next to this black and white plus sign. So this opens the macro, and this is what runs in the background. As you saw from before, you have the input, you have the output, and in between, you see this one here we used beforehand already, but we just put in the macro to add some configurable elements to it. And around here, this is a workaround to be able to select them later on. So we are going to build this one, and as you can see here, tools are new for you, are macro tools. First one is input, then output, and here you can see what you saw before also in the interface. You have, if you go back here to your macro, what you can see is you have something to choose the fields to format. If you jump in the macro, this is being represented by this one here. This is the list box tool, which gives you like a list box to tick numbers. And this action tool in here will update the values in your workflow, depending on how you select it in the input. Next would be, if you take a look again at the macro, choose currency type, you have a drop down. Simple, each time to select the drop down tool, And then you get a drop down with the values you define and updates values in this tool here. The same goes for choosing decimal precision. This one adds it to the interface of your tool, and this one updates the values inside the workflow. So let's go to it. How do I actually go about building this macro? How to get the idea to put this in like this? And for this, if you have this problem, I suggest you take, first of all, this data input. And what I like to do is right-click in here and copy all records with headers. Just click any fields, right-click, copy records headers. Then just just a partial number will be copied, and you open a new workflow. And this will be the workflow where you will create your new macro in. You can just copy-paste it in here. Just Ctrl-V, and then it will put it directly into an input data file. It's a text input. So this is a trick you can use also with data from outside of the designer. If you just use an Excel file, you can copy any data points, any columns or rows. You copy it, and you can basically just simply copy paste it inside this canvas, and it will build this text input tool for it. And then you can use it to actually just build your workflow on it, because this is more performant and doesn't get lost on the way. Next thing I want is basically replicate this one first. So I take these two tools. This tool I don't need this time, so I select it. So let's just take it for the sake of it. A simple thing is you can just copy paste them and copy them from here. Just select them both, and then you can paste them directly onto your new workflow. And it keeps the settings you have from before, which is quite convenient to actually build your macro out from this point here. So this is what you have for now. This is the workflow we had, and to make this a macro, you can do as simply as such. You need macro input, macro output. Once you have it in, this workflow will be a macro. So if you right-click on this tool here, once it's loaded on my side, you can have here the button to convert it to macro input. And once I do this, it turns to macro input and uses this data as a sample data to actually build out your macro. So it's loading right now. And in the end, of course, we need an output. So to get the output directly in, you can see on the top, on the tool palette, you have one folder with the interface tools. If you click on them, you can see basically the macro tools to build the interface. And here you have macro output. So you can simply drag and drop it onto the canvas. Perfect. And what you can see here on the configuration window is you can give it a name for the output. In our case, I just have one, just call it output. And here's something else called anchor abbreviation. So I will put an O in there. And I will show you shortly what this will do. So, but first let's take a look at the input, at the macro input tool. So here's a text input data. You can also use a file to input for your sample data for it. You can run it on. In this case, is the one I copy pasted in before. Input name is the same, and I leave this blank for now. Just show you how this works. And next, I simply want to save this one, and I want to save it inside the folder where I run the macro. So I run it directly in here. I just call it my first macro. Be your macro name. All right. And if you have any questions, you should be able to see some Q&A thing you can select where you can ask questions, and then we'll be happy to answer them. Also, either I will answer them directly here on the live training, or we will answer them via chat. So once you have your macro, I mean, I just used this once here, but I already have it done. So what I want to see is, let's put it, if you right-click on the canvas, you go on Insert, and on the bottom, you will find something called a macro. And here basically picks up any macros in the folder where you saved your workflow in. So this is my first macro to use, and then I get the tool already. And I want to connect it, of course, here to my data input. Let's move this one away because you used it already. And you can see here, you need to put the comment to the back first. So I just simply send it to back, and I see my macro in here. The macro doesn't have a face because I didn't add it yet. You can see here the output anchor has an O as an abbreviation. That's exactly what I chose before in my first macro. And go back here, I can do the same for the input tool once it's loading. And then we will try to build this out in more detail. So let's say the first thing we want to do is we want to change the currency in here. So if I go in here, you can see down here on the left-hand side on the expression window, the $sign. So I want to be able to change it to different currencies. To do this, I check the interface in here and see what is the best to use. So I just want to provide the drop-down, let's say. We could also do this another one, for example, the text box to put it in directly. But here for the ease of use, I use a drop-down. Canvas. The question here is choose currency. Simple as that. Next, we need to connect it to our multi-field formula tool. For that, you just simply drag and drop here from the magnifying glasses to the lightning bolt, which shows the macro, and then the action tool pops up in between. So first of all, I need to configure the drop-down. So in here, I can choose on the left-hand side to manually set values for it. And in this case, I prepared them already to copy-paste them in here. And first, as you can see here, is a name-value pair. So the name is $, and the value I want to use is the $sign. Same goes for euro, is a euro sign, and so on. And in this action tool now, I have to define which value I want to replace with the value from the dropdown. So we know it already when we look at this tool here. We want to replace the $sign, right? Because that's a currency. So we simply select on the left-hand side, you find the expression from the formula tool. You click it, and then if you look at the down here on the bottom, on the left-hand side, you can replace a specific string inside this expression. So what we want to replace is a $sign. So what I just need to do is delete the rest. And now I deleted too much. Let's take it from here again. I just want this one here, the $sign. So I can just copy paste in here also. That's also fine. Let's save our macro. I just press Ctrl S, saves it directly. And if you jump back to our workflow where we use it, you can see something pops up here. The macro, my first macro, has changed and was refreshed. So the designer is smart enough to actually recognize if you change something you're using in here, one of the tools, and tells you has changed and I have updated it. And you can see the result already. You have an input anchor abbreviation with I. On the left-hand side, something pops up. Choose currency, exactly what we built before. And here you can select it directly. So let's say we want to change to yen. And we run the workflow. And here we can see our macro in action with the first change we made, which is what you can see here, exactly what we want. The currency symbol in front, 1000 separator, 2 decimal places, exactly like this tool here. Just now we can actually dynamically select the currency to input. So make it much easier to use this later on. In other workflows you build also, or you want to share it with any colleagues. But we want to go on. What you want to reach is basically this one here. First thing, what you also can see, what I mentioned beforehand, is the icon of it. So let me show you now first how to change that. You don't see it directly. For that, you need to go to the view in the upper left corner of your designer. You go on View, and you can see here, Interface Designer. If you click the Interface Designer, something pops up like this, which shows you the configurations here, how it looks like. You can arrange them in here also. And here in the properties, you can select the standard icon. You can choose one of the pre-built-in ones. or you can select a custom icon. In our case, you can use anything. I just Googled quickly for currency icon. I found a free one. And if I open it, that's it already. I will hide this again. I don't need it anymore. And if I save it now and go back to my workflow, I can see that it has refreshed, and you can see here the symbol changed. Perfect. Next thing is, this is the pre-built one. We want to be able to choose the decimal precision. So let's try to do that. So we check the interface tools again up here. So you click on interface and you see the tools up here. So what we want now is somehow choose decimal places. So I think a good thing is to use the numeric up-down. What you saw before is perfect for this task. So I drag and drop it on the canvas again. And same as the drop-down tool, I just connect it to the lightning bolt on the multi-field formula tool. So I want to update another value in there. And this time, I want to make it from this numeric up-down. So in the numeric up-down tool, on the left-hand side, in the configuration window again, as before, you can enter the text or question to be displayed. In this case is simply choose decimal precision. Minimum, you can set a minimum, maximum. In this case, doesn't really matter. Increment is 1, so you want to change it by 1 decimal place. And default, I don't think 50 is a good idea. So I changed it to 2 because this is the most commonly used ones. And decimal places, in this case, we don't need it. Don't get confused. We choose decimals, and then you can choose decimals here. This is just for the tool and not for the decimals itself. So let's see how this actually changed already. So I save my macro again. Go to the left-hand side on currency formatting. Again, the macro is updated, and I can see here it added the decimal precision. So if I put it to 4 and run the workflow, let's see. And if you don't remember from before, down here in the results window, you can select on the left-hand side here the messages, and you can switch to input and output also. If you didn't use it before, this is really convenient to actually check what the tool is doing and if it's doing it correctly. You can say here, my input, I can't read these values. You select the output anchor here directly inside, and you can see if I change around that it changed just beautifully. But now you want to automate it even further because you want to choose which fields to update. The same as this one is doing it, what we want to build in the end. So it looks like this first, and now we need to actually select fields. So let's check our interface tools. For this, a list box is perfect to select fields. So put this on the canvas, but the problem is, we can't update the fields in here directly. So we need a bit of a workaround here. And the workaround we are going to use includes the select tool. So if you think about how do you normally in a workflow select different columns, and that is with the select tool, right? So you check preparation up here in the tool palette, the blue icon, and then you go here on the right side is the select tool, also in your favorites bar, as you all know it, and drag and drop it in between here. And now the nice thing is with this macro, I can connect the list box to the select tool. And here something pops up, which is update select with multiple select list box, which is possible with the select tool. So you can update the tool with the list box you want to display. So you select it in here, that tool is set. And now we just need to connect this tool here to the input to grab the input columns. And we do this by this anchor here on the bottom of the input tool. So I drag and drop it on top of the list box. And as you can see here, you can now select the inputs. First of all, we nearly forgot to set the question. So what do you want to display here? And the question here is, which columns do you want to format? So I just format it as a question this time. Which columns do you want to format. And in here, I only want to format numeric types, right? So let's deselect these ones here to make it easier for you actually to choose the right things. In this case, it just displays what you select here, double, float, so all the numeric data types. Perfect, we got as far. So how about we save it and try out how it looks like. So update it again. And you see here, we have it in here. We can select our columns now we want to format. So just for the ease of use, I select base pay and overtime pay for this. And let's just run the workflow and see how it looks like. And you see here, again, I click on output, input, output. I can see, oops, I lost a lot of the columns, which I actually don't want. And this is actually common if you create anything in Alteryx, because it's like problem solving and there's a lot of troubleshooting involved. So you need to see how it works. You do the first tries and then you try to find a workaround to actually get to the end result you want. In this case here, we obviously deselected something from the columns, but we still want to have them in here later. So for that, we need to build the workaround now. So going back in the macro, here we selected them, but we don't want to lose the data from before. Like let's run this. You can actually in the macro also run this one, so you can see your results in here. It's easier to build it. So in the select tool, we actually, if you select something, you lose your records. So if you think about it, how can we solve this? Just ask yourself and then see which tools you would use. And of course, in front of this, we still have the original data. And after here, we lose it. So you need to join the data from before with the data we get out of here. So that's what we do next. So we somehow need to join. We need to join data later, right? So I have here the join tool, and I just connect it here to the right input. I will explain you later why it is better to choose the right one. And I had something from before on the left-hand side. So if I drag it in here, but one thing is I need to select some field I can identify the same columns with. And if I take a look at my data, let's say in here, I'm not sure. I will lose most fields. So can I join by base pay, overtime pay when I select it? No, you can select anything. So you need something new you can identify. You can join them on. And this is something you will use often when you merge data and you transform it in Alteryx. Something really community uses up here in the preparation tool palette is a record ID tool. It's really convenient to this kind of tasks. Because like this, you can later identify which records belong to each other. So what this tool is doing is assigning a record ID to each field. So example, what we see down here, you can get IDs already. This tool will put them into an extra column called record ID. So that's what this tool is doing. Let's run it directly so you can see it in case you didn't see it before. It adds a record ID here. So for each row, you have a unique ID. And you can use this to merge them again later on. So you drag and drop this here on this left input, and then you can configure your join tool directly by saying, hey, I want to join them on record ID. Perfect. And this output here needs to go somewhere else now. So let's delete this one. Delete connection, we click on it and connect it to the join of the join tool. Perfect. Let's see how it looks like. It's probably a lot of comms you don't need, but first let's see how it actually looks like, if it's working as it should or not yet. Let's run it here first. So we got an error message that string fields can only be joined to other string fields. So there's some issue inside the data, but we will solve that directly. And you can also take a quick peek on this side here, the finish tool. And you can see we are nearly there already. It did the same thing, joining it on record ID. just looks a bit further ahead. So in here, to solve this error, we need to troubleshoot as always. And right now, I'm not exactly sure why we got an issue here right now. So for the ease of use, I will go back to this one here and use this one here, but before using this. So let's delete this one here, connect it. So this is how it should look like. This is how far we went. Join by record ID. I saved this one here, build your first macro. It was updated, and in this case, it is this one here you want to use going onwards. So let's go to 2 decimal points. I want the dollar this time. I just want other pay also. Let's run this one and see what we get. And here in the output, we can actually see something different, because if you look in here, in this field here, you can actually say you want to copy output fields and add them instead of overwriting what you have. And you can add a prefix to it, which is called, I just called it formatted fields. So if you go back to your build on workflow, you keep this one. If you go to the right-hand side, on the bottom right, you can see what I selected was added in here without touching the rest of the data. Maybe convenient if you want to do something else with it and just have it as extra columns. But this can be deselected also inside the tool. Not a problem. But next thing here, if we investigate your data, you can see here I have overtime pay, other pay, benefits. But if you scroll on here, you can see I have right job title, right space pay. So I basically have duplicate records. And of course, I don't want the metadata, so I need to get rid of it. Also one part of the workaround. And for this, what you can see before is I used the dynamic select tool. So let's go select. Drag and drop it in here directly from the search bar. It's also possible, it's not a problem. And in here you can say on left-hand side in the configuration window, you can select via formula. So here you can say that this data shouldn't contain, and then use the field, what you can see in the constants. If you used the formula tools before or similar, you can always select fields and constants on this side here. So in this case, I want to address the name. And it shouldn't contain right underscore. So if I would put in here, this says the exclamation mark says not, so does not contain. And the contains function gives out if the name contains the string right underscore. So now if I save this and I jump back into this one here, macro was updated. Let's just run it directly again to see what we changed. If it's actually working or when you troubleshoot something, as always. And then you can see here, we don't have the duplicates anymore. They removed the right stuff completely. So if you see here, you can see you have the right side, you have the left side here, and then you have the newly formatted strings from the right side. And here why this was handy to use the right input anchor for the multi-field formula tool, because it makes it much easier to deselect values later on. Because now for this numbers here, you have for this here, you don't have a right in there because they don't appear in the other data set. But these ones here who appear in there have a right in front. And like this, you can simply deselect them using the dynamic select tool, which makes the whole macro dynamic. To build these macros is a lot of testing what works and trying out until you have like a macro you're happy with. But it can be also as easy as just using the first workflow I showed you to just make simple calculations, or you want to make it a with more features in there, like choose decimal precision, choose a type. You can like change anything in here. you want if you have more complex workflows. So if I go back in here, we have our finished macro, which looks like this. You can select the fields to format. You can select currency type. Let's just check out the run this time. I want a lot of decimal places. Run it again. And sweet, this is like building your own Alteryx tool. And you can use this to anything you use more often. You can build the macro for it, and you can simply input the macro into your workflow and use it to simplify your workflow, to make you solve things faster, or to help your colleagues who don't have a technical ability to use Alteryx to a much richer extent than what they're used to. And here on the right side, you have the runt in front in 5 decimal places. So I hope you could follow along roughly by building this. Otherwise, just take a look at the finished macro I shared with you. You can actually see how the tools were configured. There's not too much in the background to configure, so you should be able to replicate it. Otherwise, a recording of the session will be posted in the community, same as for your other training sessions from this week. And on top of it, we have many more resources to actually learn about it. But let me jump back into the slides. So let me jump back in the slides to give you more what else we have in macros, because what I showed here is just a standard macro we have. So let me quickly see to stop sharing my screen. Perfect. I hope you can see the slides again. All right, now you should see the slides again. So let's go back where we stopped, which is, yes, this one here, Alteryx Standard Training. And here what you can see is actually different type of macros we have. So the first thing what you can see is the standard macro, or what I just showed you. We just built a standard macro. It's a shared process. It's a typical workflow, a packaged set of tools. It's simple and a bit easier to understand. If you have a coding background and you know a bit about for loops or for each or while loops, then you will be easier to grasp the concept of batch macro, because a batch macro is actually can loop through each record in your data. For example, you want to run a certain workflow for each field in one column. You can do it with a batch macro directly. So you can say like, hey, for this field, I want to run the macro, and then it basically can update your macro by the fields in your file and then create a table out of it. So you can process for each individual record, and also for group of records. It's like a for loop. And the third thing is a bit more advanced, is the iterative macro, it's called, and this runs until a condition is met. So for example, you do have a repeating process. It repeats like 5, 6 times, and you want to know what's coming out. Then you can use an iterative macro. And it runs for a predefined number of times. First of all, you can do it, but you can also do it until a condition is met. Like, for example, when this value hits 1000, then stop the macro, and I want to know how the other values look like. You can different conditions. A good example would be if you want to calculate compound interest for, 10 years, then you set up this macro, and you add interest rate for the first year, and then you run it 10 times for the next 10 years, and you get the results. I mean, you can use a math formula for it, but you can also do it simply with an iterative macro if you just want to play around with it. And it's quite useful for other things also. But it's more like advanced things you may need when it's more about automating a big workflow or having a bit more complicated use cases. And this comes in really handy. Otherwise, if you have any questions to me, I'm happy to answer them. I can see here one question was answered already. Okay. So someone of you asked, what is the core purpose of applying macros in the workflow? So the core purpose is, as I stated beforehand, I think you can read the answer also in the Q&A section, but there are multiple reasons why you should use a macro, and this is, first of all, as you could see in the slide here, for a batch macro or iterative macro is actually something you can't do in your workflow directly. Sometimes you need to loop over each records, and you have a more complicated workflow behind it, and Alteryx can't do it direct in one go. So you need to create a batch macro for it. So that would be like the easiest case you need it. Same for the iterative macro. Just something you don't have a big alternative for. When it just comes to standard macros, like a shared process, this is just to package something which looks a bit bigger into something simple, the same as the currency formatting we just did. You can make something simple and easier to use if you need to use it over and over again. Just simplifies the use of it, makes it for you faster to solve, and you're basically all automating it. And you can use like anything to input in your macro. I see a question that if you want to input data from a database table inside your macro, you can probably do it directly, but an easier way is maybe to input data first, like let's say you input data, and then you put your macro just behind it to run through it as also a possibility. Otherwise, I hope you have a better idea now what macros are. And to go on further, I come to support. So you can see here we have the Alteryx community, what I mentioned at the beginning. So if you want to build your own macro and you're stuck at some point and you don't know the answer, you checked other material already and you just don't know how it works, you can just simply go to the Alteryx community, to the forum, you post a question there, you get an answer quite fast normally. As long as you formulate your question correctly, you give some sample data, and maybe also the desired outcome or describe it right, there will be people able to help you quite quickly. Next thing is we have the Academy. You can reserve live trainings and sessions. And last but not least, we have a technical support, which you can reach via email at support@alteryx.com. So if any tool for you is not working how it should be, or you think you found a bug, just message them and they're happy to help you. So for further resources, now you got a quick glimpse of macros and how to build one, how to use these tools. I want to show you further material you can use for this. So let me quickly jump in here. Let me show you. I will share my screen again okay. Let's share this, and now you should be able to see my browser again. I'm on the Alteryx website. If you haven't seen the community yet, it's quite easy. You can see Alteryx resource. You have live training, classroom training, webinars. You can even have can check old webinars for anything. So if I jump in the community, I just want to show you firsthand. If you haven't checked it out yet, this is the platform you can learn more about the Alteryx Designer. What you have here, you have the Academy mentioned before, interactive lessons. You can do your certificate. So this looks good if you want to go, get a job later, and then you can say, hey, I'm Alteryx Core certified, which like basic concepts. And if you want to go on and have more experience, you can even get advanced certified or for free. And for the advanced certificate, you need to know how macros work, for example, but it's not needed for the core. And then you can have blocks, you can see anything you want. So for the macros, training material, if you want to revisit this one, first of all, this session is recorded, will be available to you in the community, but you have videos from before already. For example, this one here, build your first macros, basically similar to what I did. If you want to jump into batch macros, we have a video for it. Search for build your first batch macro. You can check it out. If you prefer articles, we have something in our knowledge base, which is getting started with standard macros. And we have the same for batch macros and iterative macros. So there are plenty of resources you can explore. And the most important one is practice yourself if you want to know how it works, you want to lose it. And this you can do with challenges. If you haven't tried challenges yet, this is something posted weekly in our community. Under weekly challenges, you will find it. And here on the right-hand side, in the labels section, you can actually choose what challenge you want to pick on. For example, it's separate in the beginner, advanced, and intermediate. So you can see here how far you are. Maybe you want to start with the beginner ones. But in this case, I selected macros in here. You can see here. And then you have challenges with macros in there. So if you want to practice macros, check them out. Check them out, which actually matches your skills. Macros itself are a bit advanced, but as I showed you before, can be quite simple to use them all. So they don't have to be hard. For example, these one here are beginner ones. You can check out. And I hope you got the currency format pack with the input files, so you can play around with that one also, because that's what you still have in your hat. And that'll be to use. So I hope you liked this session. I see you asked quite a lot of questions, I have my answers, so that's nice. Just to put a note for the whole people here, what questions have been asked. Someone, Alexandra, asked, can you schedule a macro to run? And the answer is yes. Just make those package with a workflow as an asset or saved in a folder that the server scaler has access to. So if you have Alteryx server, you can schedule macro to run also. It's not a problem. You can schedule basically any workflow to have to run. Just make sure all the data is available to actually make it run. And to jump in there, before I used the text input to create the macro. That was just to give the macro an idea what data comes in, so you can build the macro accordingly. But in the end, it depends what you input to the macro, and not the text input you use. The text input in there was basically just a template to use and build your macro on. So later you can have an input from a database also, and then connect to it. All right, if you don't have any further questions, then I hope this helped you, and I hope you enjoyed the whole Adapt week. I'm actually amazed how many people attended. It's Friday, and there's so many people in here. So great that Alteryx can actually help you. I hope it can help you upskilling yourself, finding your job you want. I know more and more companies are using Alteryx. Our sales are higher and higher. We're expanding quickly. So I hope this is to your benefit to actually find companies using Alteryx or wanting to start Alteryx, and then you can show them, hey, I know the base already. I'm maybe already core certified. I know advanced concepts also, for example, macros, so I can help also in the team to help colleagues to make better use of it, be the Alteryx champion, and then move from there. So I really hope this is helpful and gives you a great start in data analytics. All right, and with this, thank you all. I leave you 5 minutes to go early. Enjoy your weekend. Not sure what time it is. For me, I have 5 p.m. right now. For other colleagues in here who answered your question, it's like 8 in the morning. So enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, and have fun with Alteryx.